Welcome. I am Donna Lowry, host of Lawmakers on Georgia Public Broadcasting. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series from the studios at WABE. The 2025 debate series was made possible by a grant to the Atlanta Press Club from the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation. This is the general election debate for Public Service Commission District 3. Let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Peter Hubbard is a clean energy advocate. Fitz Johnson has served as District 3 Commissioner since 2021 and is the chairman of the PSC's Energy Committee. Mr. Johnson declined today's debate and is represented by an empty podium. Now let's meet our panelists. Emily Jones is a climate reporter at WABE and GRIST. And Drew Cann is a climate, environment, and energy reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. For complete rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. To start the program, the candidate will be asked one question by each panelist. He will have 60 seconds to answer their questions. Drew, you get the first question to Peter Hubbard.
Mr. Hubbard, I want to ask about the issue I think is top of mind for most voters, and that's electricity bills. So there have been 6 rate increases that have kicked in for Georgia Power customers since the start of 2023. And we've seen ratepayers on social media and in the news facing $600, $700, $800 power bills. I'm curious what your plan is to keep bills affordable and electricity reliable.
Great question. One thing is when we're in a hole, we have to stop digging. So we're burning coal and gas and sending billions of dollars out of state for those resources. Instead, what we could be doing is embracing the low-cost resources like solar and batteries and things that can allow business to come to this state, but will put downward pressure on rates. So that's incredibly important. There are things like unlocking the value of solar and embracing newer technologies like virtual power plants that can allow us to accommodate the load growth we're seeing from data centers while also putting downward pressure on rates. So what we should be doing is embracing the low-cost resources, not the most expensive resources like fossil gas.
Thank you. Emily, you will now ask your question to Peter Hubbard.
The commission has generally and historically dealt with trying to balance affordability and reliability. And I'm curious what role, if any, you think that climate change and greenhouse gas emissions should play in the commission's decision-making and its regulation of Georgia Power.
There's a third leg to that stool. There's reliability, there's affordability, but also sustainability. And all 3 of those have to be taken into consideration when we're planning out our future energy grid. The good thing, though, is that we don't have to really compromise among those things. The lowest cost resource is also the most sustainable and the most reliable. So solar and battery storage will increase the reliability and lower costs for consumers in this state. So we can have our cake and eat it too in that sense. And there's a lot of solutions that are on the table that this Public Service Commission is not picking up and implementing that could lower our power bills and allow us to accommodate that new load growth in the state from businesses and people that want to move to this state.
All right, thank you very much. In the second round, the candidates question each other. Since Fitz Johnson declined to participate, Peter Hubbard, you may pose a question to the empty podium. You will also have 30 seconds to provide a rebuttal to how you feel your opponent would have responded.
My question would be, why didn't you have the courage to show up today and defend your 6 rate hikes in 2 years? And what will you do to lower power bills? The answer to that question is I had the courage to show up here today like Jon Ossoff did to this day and every day, and unlike the Republicans. So what will I do to lower power bills? I've mentioned a few, but I will unlock the value of solar that is held captive by the monopoly electric utility who has their thumb on the scale of fossil fuels. I'll bring down that profit metric, which would unlock $700 million that we can use to lower power bills. And I'll accelerate some of the technologies like virtual power plants while also making data centers pay their fair share.
All right, thank you very much. Any more that you wanted to add?
That's
okay.
all, thanks.
All righty. That concludes our second round. You are watching the debate for Public Service Commission District 3. Fitz Johnson declined to participate in and is represented by an empty podium. We will now go back to our panel to ask questions to Mr. Hubbard until we run out of time. Emily, you will start with the first question in this round.
Mr. Hubbard, in addition to your advocacy work before the PSC, you also work for a solar developer in what your website describes as states that are less hostile to renewable energy. How can Georgia voters be sure that if elected, you would serve their interests and not those of solar developers like the one that you work for?
That's a really good question. And what I can say is that over the 6 years of my clean energy advocacy, I've been very transparent in publishing the results. I've provided expert witness testimony in the last 4 integrated resource plans. I've even come up with my own alternative integrated resource plan and broke through the veil of the trade secrecy. We can't see the assumptions behind the power plan that Georgia Power Company puts forward, but I've published all of that information. So it's very much available for scrutiny. And I think that goes a long way towards transparency and accountability. As far as the solar development company, it's a private company, and I don't have any business here with that company in Georgia. I'm busy developing solar projects in places like Texas, where solar is eating the lunch of natural gas-fired capacity. So I think overall, I'm very transparent about what about the analysis that I'm doing, and I'll continue that transparency and make sure that first of all, and I'll just conclude by saying it will be the only job that I have, the Public Service Commission, not doing work as a real estate agent as my opponent is.
All right. Drew, you have the next question.
Turning back to data centers, Georgia's seen a huge influx of those. They obviously have enormous energy demands. The PSC approved earlier this year some changes to Georgia Power's billing rules that allows them to charge data center customers more for their service. What do you plan to do to ensure that data centers pay their fair share and that other ratepayers are not saddled with cost of serving them?
This is a really important question because data centers right now are paying about 5 times less than what the average residential customer pays on their summer bills. So data centers pay 4.2 cents per kilowatt hour, and the average residential customer in the summer pays 21 cents a kilowatt hour. So right there's a cost shift that's going from data centers onto the backs of residential ratepayers in particular. So that's certainly one thing, is adjusting that cost allocation and how much they're paying versus what we're paying. The other thing is we're building a massive amount of fossil fuel infrastructure, new substations, new transmission lines to accommodate these data centers. And if there aren't clawback mechanisms in those contracts to make sure that they pay for all of those infrastructure upgrades that might last 15 or 20 years to pay off, if they leave and decamp to another state that has more generous tax abatements than what Georgia already offers, we will be left holding the bag. And that's another way that costs can be shifted onto the backs of ratepayers. So we need a commissioner who will look out for the interests of the public.
Thank you. Emily.
We've talked a couple times about the recent string of rate hikes that have happened. One of those increases was a 2023 increase to customer bills to cover fuel costs, and that is something that you have specifically criticized. Under state law, though, Georgia Power can pass those costs on to customers, and the position that the current commissioners have generally taken is that fuel cost recovery is essentially sort of a pass-through vote where their hands are kind of tied. So I'm curious what your view is of the commission's role in that fuel cost recovery process and how you would tackle that issue if you were elected.
Right. Today, 100% of fuel costs are passed through to customers, and so there's no skin in the game for Georgia Power Company or incentive to reduce the amount of fuel that we're consuming. And again, it's $2 billion each year that we're sending out of state to states like Texas and Wyoming for coal and gas. I think that there should be some skin in the game. It could even be a few percentage points of that fuel cost that Georgia Power Company pays, and then there would be an incentive for them to economize on that. But they don't have that incentive because Georgia Power Company has 3 or 4 affiliate companies that profit off of the sale and the transportation and the marketing and the remarketing of natural gas. So there's money to be made coming and going on this fossil fuel infrastructure, and it's in their best interests and the interests of the shareholders to maximize that.
All right. Drew.
I want to ask about nuclear. So Georgia Power, a few years ago, finished the first 2 new nuclear reactors in the country at Plant Vogtle. A lot of models out there show that it will be difficult or impossible to wean all the way off of fossil fuels without adding more nuclear. Would you support the construction of new nuclear power plants in Georgia if you're elected?
So I've done a lot of that modeling. In fact, published it on my nonprofit website, georgia-ces.org, right on the landing page. And I am generally happy that we now have clean energy resources or carbon-free emission resources in Vogtle 3 and 4. When those were added to the grid, it pushed off coal and gas and cleaned up the emissions on our grid. So I'm thankful for that. I just wish we weren't saddled with the cost overruns. And as a reminder, the monopoly utility can make profits even off cost overruns. So it was meant to be $4 billion. The project ended up being $36 billion for that expansion. Unless we can get those costs constrained, unless we can have mechanisms to claw back from, say, Westinghouse if they go bankrupt again, then I don't think that nuclear is there. And we shouldn't have to burden ourselves with getting to 100% clean energy. We only have 7% solar right now. Let's get to carbon-free emissions that are 50%, then 60, 70, 80. We can get to those goals first and then worry about that harder last 100%.
All right, Emily, another question for the candidate.
Reliability is often cited as a primary reason to keep using fossil fuel resources like coal and gas. Also, a main reason that nuclear is considered part of reaching carbon-free. How would you ensure that a grid that has less carbon on it can also reliably produce energy when it's needed?
I'd show it by demonstrating it, which I have, again, with that alternative integrated resource plan. What I did was I took a National Renewable Energy Laboratory model called REEDS and looked 20 years into the future at every single hour of the load and energy demand in Georgia and saw that we could meet that load demand even with data center load growth, with renewables, and maintain the reliability of our grid. So I know for a fact that it can be done without the coal, without the baseload things. That's old thinking. I heard some of that in a subcommittee on energy on the House side by a professor from Georgia Tech. There's many folks who are stuck in their ways and just don't understand and aren't looking around at all of the grids that are operating on close to 100% energy today. So it is not a question of reliability. The reliability is there. There's never been a day when the sun didn't rise. Solar is very reliable, but there's old thinking that's holding us back, and I'm looking to unlock that.
All right, Drew, another question.
So you've intervened down at the PSC through your nonprofit in several recent proceedings and have been pretty sharply critical of some of the things that Georgia Power has done and at times have butted heads with some of the other commissioners on certain issues. I'm curious to find out, if you're elected, you'll be on the other side. How do you plan to regulate the company and work with your fellow commissioners to find solutions that benefit Georgia Power ratepayers?
Sure. Georgia Power Company deserves to make a profit. That's the social construct, is we don't want to duplicate wires, so we give them monopoly, and then there's a watchdog regulator who makes sure that spending is just and prudent. I also know that I will have to work across the aisle with the other commissioners, and there's a few of the commissioners that I absolutely can work with. I can sit down and have a conversation with. I know that they are hearing from their constituents that they are frustrated with their power bills. Even conservatives and progressives alike would like to see a diversity of thought on the commission because those bad mistakes are flowing down to their power bills as well. And I'm bringing solutions to the table, and I think that the other commissioners will be receptive to that because, frankly, they need solutions. There's not an energy expert on the commission right now, and I'm bringing very tangible, real-world, commercially deployed solutions to the table that can lower power bills right now. So I think those solutions will appeal to even folks across the aisle.
All right, Emily, we have time for one quick question.
Utility commissions in other states have implemented something called performance-based regulation, where profits are tied to performance. Is that a system that you would advocate for, you think would work in Georgia? And if so, what metrics would you want?
Yeah, that is a really good one that has performance-based rate making, or PBR. It's known in places like Hawaii Electric Company, where rates are incredibly high, but because it's an island. It can have some impact here, and I'd like to study that. That'll be something that I'll do in the first year to really understand if that's something we can implement here. But I think there's lower hanging fruit rather than transforming how we regulate. Again, we have a regulatory system that makes sure costs are just and prudent. And that's what role I'll play. And that can work well when you have a watchdog who cares. But right now we don't have that. So performance-based rate making is a solution in part, but I think there's other solutions that may be easier to implement even before that.
Thank you very much. That is all the time we have for questions. Peter Hubbard will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement.
Thank you, Donna. So let me be clear. The All-Republican Commission raised rates 6 times in 2 years that increased your power bill, and they have more increases on the way from the bad decisions they're making today. The All-Republican Commission is rubber stamping plans to build massive new fossil fuel infrastructure for data centers that is more expensive and less reliable today than solar and batteries, and will lead to expensive increases on future power bills. Instead, voters have a choice. Voters, beginning October 14th, when early voting starts, can elect 2 new commissioners, Peter Hubbard and Dr. Alicia Johnson, to bring solutions to the table to lower our power bills, to stop the cost shift from data centers onto the backs of residential power customers, to stop the corruption of receiving dollars from the companies and people who have business before the Public Service Commission, and who will bring accountability to the Public Service Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters, Election Day is Tuesday, November 4th. Please check with your polling location on dates and hours for early voting. Our thanks to Peter Hubbard and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and WABE for organizing today's debate, and we thank the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation for their support. For more information about the debates the Atlanta Press Club will host this election season, visit atlantapressclub.org. I'm Donna Lowry. Thank you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.